superhero games have always had a place in many people's hearts. While they haven't always been strong entries in the video game world, they have been adored. From the unlicensed IPs such as the Infamous series and City of Heroes, although that does toe the line of being called unlicensed, to the bigger known franchises such as your Spider-Man, your Arkhams, and your Injustice, although I was partial towards 2009's X-Men Origins Wolverine. Now let's look a bit into the Arkham side of things. When Batman Arkham Asylum came out, this was hailed as the best of its kind. For many years, people had called Asylum the definitive best superhero video game of all time. And the truth is, many people still do. That's a hard bar to beat if you ask me. Developed by Rockstars, this giant of a video game sported a fantastic cast, thrilling story, and pushed the video game industry far beyond what anyone had expected it to, which would eventually see the world with its sequels, Arkham City and Arkham Knight, also being the motivating force for the Arkham prequel developed by Warner Bros. Montreal, Arkham Origins. Alright, with all that fantastic exposition out the way, you know the why, because we all freaking love the Arkham games. So I thought it's about time that I jump into the world of Suicide Squad Kills the Justice League. Truth be told, I had avoided this game like a familiar face in a shopping center because I had a big feeling it wasn't going to respect the story which had come before. After having a near-life experience, also known in the gaming community as a Steam sale, it was time to see this through. Now I don't quite know what the crossover was with the studios or who had their hands in what pies, but I find it very comical that this game is basically same but different as Gotham Knights. If you think of the in-universe take on DC Comics Gotham and Metropolis, you would know that people from Metropolis think they live in the sunniest circle of Earth, and Gotham is the antithesis of that, being this dark, horror-infested land, while basically being the same in regards to every other aspect of Metropolis. Well, this is exactly how Suicide Squad compared to Gotham Knights. It really does feel like the "can I copy your homework" meme. Now that's not to say that Suicide Squad doesn't do a lot better than Gotham Knights, because it sure does. But I think what would shock most people is that there are some things that it absolutely does worse than Gotham Knights. So you start your adventure with the typical Arkham style introduction. The way these games love to start you off is by giving you a very strong opening cinematic and then letting you play through a slow portion of story while the exposition is usually being set up through the events happening around your character while you're walking from, say, point A to point B. Now, it'll be no shock to anyone who is familiar with any Suicide Squad story how this is going to unfold. You meet Amanda Waller, played by the amazing Deborah Wilson, who coerces the squad being Harley Quinn, King Shark, Captain Boomerang, and Deadshot into killing the Justice League, as they have been corrupted by the villain Brainiac. I'll say for the most part, Brainiac's plan doesn't matter. It's not important. It's a plot device that is so far in the background, I would need to put my glasses on to see it. And that's okay to me, because I didn't find it particularly interesting anyway, so I felt like that was one less thing for me to spend my attention on. Now the big chug in here is that you can play as any 4 of the squad members who come with their own moveset, their own fighting style, a unique way to traverse the city, and their own separate talent trees. On the surface, it's a good idea, until it's not. Once you realize that these mechanics are all built around the looter shooter as a service element, you really start to see the cracks in the surface. The traversal for me was probably the most interesting aspect of the game, and it was a big gut punch to realize how toned down it actually is. Back when the Arkham Knight Showcase demo was released, I was over the moon at the idea of the Batmobile ejecting into a glide mechanic and spent what seemed like forever watching that demo. I still open Arkham Knight and City today just to glide around. The big catch here is that the squad borrows their movement sets from the Justice League, with the exception of King Shark, as he is naturally able to leap onto tall buildings as the Gold Star Olympian that he is. Harley Quinn borrows Batman's grapple gun and a glider to swing herself around the city. Deadshot makes use out of a short-circuiting jetpack. King Shark is a manly shark, and Boomer uses a Speed Force gauntlet. All of these concepts could have worked extremely well if there were less limitations on them, and actually felt like you were soaring around the sky as Superman or were grappling with Batman's intensity. Boomer feels closest to a complete package with his gauntlet, however the limitations on movement and the requirement to stop every few steps to recharge your movement puts a massive dampener on the fun of tumbling around Metropolis. This is probably the biggest aspect that mirrors Gotham Knights, which features the same issues. And that's where we once again return to that feeling of same, but different. And if that wasn't enough, this game loves to force you into slow walking. between missions, while talking to characters. Hell, you'll even be forced into a slow walk when talking to someone over your communicator. I do remember this being a bit of an issue in either Arkham Asylum or City, could have been both, but here it is a massive problem. I felt that the purpose of this game is to keep you playing, but not in a good way. It feels like very early Diablo 4, where the game has certain elements in play to keep you there for longer. The slow walking when talking over the radio. Another good example is the mission complete and loot screen showing two unskippable animations back to back. If there was a way to skip them or a setting, I did not find it. You will also have screens that will introduce mechanics throughout the whole story, as it's basically one long tutorial until the end game, and these screens will require you to hold escape for up to 3 to 5 seconds to agree and close, as sort of like a confirmation yes, I understood the mechanics. I feel like the escape key was chosen as the confirmation button as it's so far off the beaten path, in turn keeping you on the menu even longer. Look, if you can cast aside minor annoyances such as those and completely forego the games as a service element, unless of course that's what you're looking for in this title, this game can be fun, and at times even childish, and give you quite a few belly laughs.
I counted on you going rogue to get us inside LexCorp.
All humans do is manipulate. In my home, father would never...
I'm your daddy now, Shark! That goes for all of you. I'm your daddy.
So it's not all doom and gloom. Metropolis is designed very well, which should be no shock as Rocksteady always excels when it comes to the city design. There are fantastic billboards and mock marketing from the DC universe all over the place, which is very hilarious. One thing that really amazed me is the celebration of the Justice League. In the Arkham games, Batman isn't celebrated near as much because that is his mythos, whereas with the League, it is much different, and you can tell that this is a city that idolizes their heroes. You can visually see the pedestal that these gargantuan figures sit upon, which I really love. Now, you're not going to be getting overly elaborate missions when it comes time to explore the city. I think there was about 4 or 5 different mission types. It does get old and repetitive. I would wager that if you had binged this game in 1 or 2 sessions, I think you would definitely hate it. If you play the game for a week or 2, not taking anything too seriously and not putting every fiber of your being into the game, as many of us love to do, guilty, maybe you won't love it, but you may end up liking it. There are a fair amount of things to like in this game. The humour is definitely there. The cinematics, while not always impactful, are gorgeous, and the cast play their characters well. Now, I'm saying this as someone who for the most part stayed away from the online type of elements, didn't do too many repeatable contracts and only upgraded gear when I needed to, as I felt that during the story that kind of stuff wasn't always necessary. The game does borrow, or at least attempt to borrow, a few elements from the Arkham combat system, such as the counter becoming counter shots, basically working the same way. An enemy will have a blue or yellow counter icon, and when that happens, you aim at them and press a counter button, releasing a devastating AoE shot, and certain enemies can only be taken down using this counter shot. There is also a shield system in play where you will need to keep your shield energized by shooting enemies in the leg, which was a bit of a weird and clunky system, but after the first few hours it did become second nature. I think that's more due to the repetitive nature rather than things clicking into place. I didn't struggle too much with any major issues when I think of the gameplay. The guns felt decent and the game didn't glitch for the most part, and things seemed to work the way they had been intended. However, the game being always online was a whole different issue. If this game crashed, or you were unfortunate enough to experience the infinite loading screen, which I had the pleasure of both multiple times, get ready to replay missions that you have already completed. This was frequent in my experience. There was even one instance where I had to complete a whole boss gauntlet that I had already completed due to the fact that the game would not progress the loading screen after I killed the boss. Which, while I'm on the topic, before I do forget, I'll say that while this style of gameplay wasn't enough to completely turn me off the experience of the story, the bosses had no substance. It took me quite a while to face my first boss, and the mechanics are so basic, I thought that it was a mini boss. This trending continues through most of the game. If I think on the Arkham series as a whole, there are so many standout bosses, and yet there are some that are very stock standard ones as well. I think in Suicide Squad, they are all poor. I would have to educate a guess and say that the encounter team that worked on this game had not worked on the previous ones as well, because the mechanics are mostly non-existent. Aside from the dodge this attack and dodge that attack, the biggest challenge on the bosses is the amount of area damage that occurs. And this is purely because in the boss arena, they throw hordes and hordes of enemies at you, which is, to me, artificial challenge. Not because you have a boss that has genuinely interesting and difficult mechanics. Now I'm sure many of you are already aware of the controversy surrounding this story, so I'm not going to get into the fine details of it all, but I will say, from an A to Z package, I feel like the story of this game was only created due to the issues surrounding the online elements. I personally feel like the studio went back and added more story than what we would have received if this game never got delayed. I don't believe I played a DC game with such a lacking story and underused characters, which is actually a very vocal statement. You won't be seeing the villains all too much, and most of the interaction or backstory that takes place is just you listening to the League talk over the communications that Waller has hacked into. The story feels like it's intended to gap the shortcomings of the game's design, and while this might be the case, it's worth noting that it does not feel like an Arkham-made story at all. This is where I feel all of this should have been given to the Gotham Knights studio, while Rocksteady focused on a full-fledged, single-player Arkham story, because there is something here, and at times it even feels special. It just never feels realized in the way that the studio has intended. The cinematics stay sharp, even when the story beats are dull, and the voice acting is incredible. As a lifelong fan of Kevin Conroy, it was just beautiful to hear his voice in the role of Batman again, even under the circumstances, and I love the memorial dedicated to both Conroy and Arlene Sorkin after their unfortunate passing in 22 and 23. With Kevin's death, some of the content in this game can seem distressing, so it's best to attempt to separate life and art. However, that isn't always easy to do, which is understandable. Kevin gives 100% to his character here, as does the rest of the voice cast. Samoa Joe, who plays King Shark, is a big standout. However, one thing that really annoys the bat out of me about how the story is handled is how much they don't address the ending of Arkham Knight. There is a throwaway explanation on why Bruce comes out of retirement, and that the fact that everyone knows Bruce is Batman, as he was unmasked at the end of Arkham Knight. However, the exposition gives so little detail that it feels like the writers don't actually have a proper explanation on why Batman is here. I mean, they go into more depth with a deeper explanation on how there is 2 Deadshots in the Arkham universe, and how the Deadshot from the games that we know is actually from another Earth, which I felt was another kick in the gut in the world of retconning, when this Deadshot could have easily been Bloodsport or any other character. But the fact that that got more detail than how Arkham Knight connects to this story is utterly shocking. Now, I feel like Suicide Squad was probably the best it was going to be for what it was. I don't think Rocksteady in a million years could have really done justice with this format. There are some strong points, but far too many lows. It was a good game for a short bit of fun, which for some gamers is okay, but when you are working with a triple threat, you have the legacy of these characters, the legacy of the Arkham universe, which has become so mainstream, and the legacy of Kevin Conroy, you can't fumble the bag this much and expect to walk away unaffected. I do appreciate Rocksteady giving us the chance to connect with Conroy's Batman one more time, but I think it should have played out much better. Saying that, Rocksteady couldn't have known Conroy would pass while working on this game. However, even if Conroy was still alive, the legacy of this character deserves much more respect than what is given here. Although I will say, this game has fully convinced me of a single player Flash game in the Arkham world. I would love to see that happen. If this game had been a single player Justice League game that deals with the fallout of the Nightfall Protocol, even where you still only play as Batman, this would have been potentially one of the best Arkham games and a solid 2024 banger. Now, you know how I feel, so I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. As usual, I appreciate all of your support, and I can't wait for you to see all the videos that we have coming up in the next few months. You all deserve the world, so go and live many lives in many more worlds. Until next time.